It was an ordinary Tuesday morning when Marcus walked into the bank, his usual confidence carrying him through the door. He had been coming to this branch for years, and everything about it was familiar. The quiet hum of the air conditioning, the soft clicking of keyboards, and the polite greetings from the tellers. But today was different. Today, something felt off. Marcus was dressed smartly, as usual, in a well-fitted suit and polished shoes. He had made an appointment with the bank to discuss some investment options and personal financial matters. As he approached the counter, a new face greeted him. It was the bank manager, a man Marcus had never seen before. The manager extended a hand with a forced smile, his eyes cold as he sized Marcus up. "Good morning," Marcus said with a friendly tone, offering his hand. The manager took it, but there was something about his grip that felt uncomfortable, like it was dismissive, almost mechanical. It was strange, but Marcus didn't think too much of it at first. The manager asked for Marcus's identification and account information, and as Marcus handed over the documents, he noticed the manager's gaze linger on him for just a bit too long. Something was off. He brushed it off as nerves or maybe the manager just being new, but the longer they spoke, the more uncomfortable the interaction became. As the conversation continued, the manager began to ask questions that seemed unnecessary. "Do you have any business accounts here?" he asked, though Marcus had been a personal account holder for years. "Just personal accounts," Marcus replied, keeping his tone polite, though he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The manager paused, looking over Marcus's financial information with an air of judgment. "I see," he muttered, almost under his breath. "It must be difficult, balancing finances on your own." The words were subtle but sharp, like a thinly veiled insult. Marcus froze for a moment, unsure if he had heard the manager correctly. He was used to dealing with all kinds of people, but this felt different. The manager's tone wasn't just professional, it was condescending. It was as if he was making assumptions based on nothing more than Marcus's appearance. He didn't respond immediately, trying to keep his composure. "I manage just fine," he said, his voice steady, though inside, he felt a knot tightening in his stomach. The manager didn't seem to care much for the response, brushing it off with a vague comment about the difficulties of managing finances in these times. But what struck Marcus was the tone. There was no real interest in the conversation, just a sense of judgment. After a few more uncomfortable exchanges, the manager said something that made Marcus's heart drop. "I'm not sure you're in the right place for these kinds of investments. Perhaps you should consult with someone more experienced." Marcus's mind raced as the word sank in. Experienced. Was the manager implying that he wasn't capable? That someone like him couldn't possibly understand the finer points of finance? The more Marcus thought about it, the more his frustration grew. But he didn't want to make a scene. Instead, he nodded, smiled politely, and thanked the manager for his time, all while feeling the sting of the subtle racism. As he left the bank, the mix of humiliation and anger started to build. How could someone make such assumptions based on nothing but skin color? It wasn't just the words. It was the look in the manager's eyes, the way he treated him like he didn't belong there. Marcus stepped outside, took a deep breath, and reminded himself that he didn't need to react in the heat of the moment. But he would get his revenge, just not the way the manager expected. He knew he had to be smart about it. This was far from over. Marcus walked away from the bank, feeling a mixture of disbelief and anger. The further he got from the building, the more the humiliation of what had just happened hit him. How could the bank manager make assumptions about him without knowing anything at all? He thought about the manager's words, how they had cut through him, and he couldn't help but feel a simmering rage inside. But as the anger bubbled up, Marcus pushed it down. He was used to this. He had faced unfair treatment before, but he had learned that reacting in the heat of the moment was never the right choice. There was a time to fight back, but it wasn't going to be today. He had to think carefully about how to handle this. As he walked home, he replayed the entire encounter in his mind, trying to make sense of it all. The way the manager had looked at him, like he didn't belong in that bank, had been unsettling. It wasn't just the words the manager said, it was the attitude behind them. Marcus knew it wasn't something he could let slide. If he did, it would feel like giving the manager permission to continue his behavior toward others. When he got home, Marcus sat down at his desk, deep in thought. His mind was spinning with ideas. He could feel the injustice, and that feeling pushed him to come up with a plan. He wasn't going to confront the manager directly. He knew that wouldn't get him anywhere. Instead, he thought about what would hurt the manager the most. What could truly make him understand the consequences of his actions? Marcus pulled out his laptop and began searching for information. He was no stranger to dealing with businesses, and he had learned over the years that knowledge was power. He began to look into the bank's policies, the manager's background, and any history of complaints against him. Marcus was methodical, taking notes and organizing his findings. The more he dug, the more he realized that the manager's behavior wasn't an isolated incident. There were whispers of past complaints about his attitude, especially toward clients who didn't fit his idea of a respectable customer. This gave Marcus the ammunition he needed. He didn't want to destroy the man's career, but he wanted him to face the consequences of his actions. The manager needed to be held accountable, not just for what he had said to Marcus, but for all the people he had belittled and mistreated over the years. Marcus wasn't driven by revenge for the sake of revenge. He was driven by a need for justice. The way the manager had looked down on him, with such ease and arrogance, was unacceptable. But Marcus wasn't the kind of man to simply let things go. He believed in taking action, in using his intelligence and resources to make a difference. The bank manager had shown him disrespect, and Marcus was determined to make sure that it wasn't forgotten. He spent the rest of the evening gathering his evidence. He knew that this wasn't going to be easy, but he also knew it was the right thing to do. As he clicked through the information on his screen, he couldn't help but feel a small sense of satisfaction. He was getting closer. Tomorrow, he would take the next step. The following morning, Marcus sat at his desk, the weight of his plan hanging in the air. He had spent the previous night researching the bank's policies, the manager's history, and any relevant complaints that might give him the leverage he needed. The manager's dismissive attitude had hurt, but it also had fueled something inside Marcus, a sense of purpose. He wasn't going to let this slide. Marcus knew that the key to making the bank manager face the consequences of his actions was to be smart. He couldn't just walk in and confront the man. That would make him the one who seemed unreasonable. Instead, Marcus needed to work through the proper channels, using the bank's own systems against it. He decided to start by carefully writing out the details of the encounter. The more specific he could be, the stronger his case would be. He wanted to make sure everything he said was backed by facts. No assumptions, no exaggerations. As he typed, he recalled every moment of his interaction with the manager. From the way the manager had looked at him, sizing him up with a critical eye, to the subtle condescension in his words. Marcus described it all, word for word, paying attention to every small detail. He even included the uncomfortable silences between them, the moments when he could feel the manager's judgment in the air. But Marcus didn't stop there. He knew that if he wanted the bank to take his complaint seriously, he had to show that this wasn't just about him. The manager's behavior wasn't an isolated incident, so Marcus spent time searching for any records of similar complaints against the manager. It didn't take long before he found a few, a handful of reports from customers who had felt mistreated by the same man. He copied these documents and added them to his growing collection of evidence. By midday, Marcus had everything he needed. He had outlined the details of the interaction, collected evidence of past complaints, and even found the bank's formal procedure for filing complaints. He was ready. With a deep breath, Marcus sat back and looked over everything one last time. He wanted to make sure there were no mistakes. This was his chance to make a real difference. He wasn't just doing this for himself, but for anyone who had been treated unfairly by the manager. The thought of others enduring the same treatment made him more determined than ever. He clicked the submit button on the complaint form. His heart raced, but there was also a sense of calm. He had done everything he could to make his case solid. Now it was out of his hands. The next few hours felt like an eternity. Marcus couldn't focus on anything else. His mind kept returning to the bank and the manager, wondering how they would respond. Would the complaint be taken seriously? Would they actually do something about it? He couldn't afford to be optimistic just yet, but he allowed himself to hope that things might change. That evening, he received an email from the bank acknowledging his complaint. They'd assured him that they would investigate the matter and take appropriate action. The message was polite, formal, and professional. For the first time since the incident, Marcus felt a glimmer of relief. But the battle wasn't over. This was just the beginning. Marcus knew that getting the bank to respond was only half the fight. He had to make sure the manager was held accountable, no matter what it took. The following days passed slowly for Marcus. He kept his focus on his work, but his mind kept returning to the situation at the bank. Every time he thought about what the manager had said, a small fire of anger flickered within him. However, he knew the hard part was still ahead. Getting the complaint acknowledged was one thing, but what really mattered was the bank's response. Would they take the matter seriously? Would they look into the manager's past behavior, or would they just brush it aside? One morning, Marcus received an email notification that made his heart race. The subject line read, "Investigation update. Bank manager complaint." He quickly opened it, his eyes scanning the message with anticipation. The bank had confirmed that they were investigating his complaint and that they were reviewing the manager's actions carefully. It was a small relief to know that the wheels were in motion, but Marcus didn't allow himself to relax. He knew from experience that things could go either way. Complaints like this were not always taken as seriously as they should be, especially when the person being accused had power and influence. Still, he had done everything he could to make sure his case was solid, and now it was in the hands of the bank. The next week, Marcus was at home when he received another call from the bank. It was a representative, asking if he had any further details to provide, or if he'd be willing to speak with someone higher up in the organization. His heart skipped a beat. This was it, the moment of truth. "I'm happy to help in any way I can," Marcus said, his voice steady. He had anticipated this call and was ready. He explained the details of the incident once again, calmly and clearly. The representative seemed to listen carefully, asking thoughtful questions and showing a genuine interest in what Marcus had experienced. After the call, Marcus felt a sense of cautious optimism. This wasn't just an automated response. This was a real effort to understand what had happened. The bank was taking the situation seriously, and that was all he could ask for. In the following days, Marcus received updates about the progress of the investigation. He learned that the bank had spoken to several other employees who had witnessed the manager's behavior. Some of them confirmed that he had acted unprofessionally before, though it hadn't been formally reported. It seemed that Marcus was not the only one who had been on the receiving end of the manager's condescending attitude. The investigation was moving along faster than Marcus had expected. He was beginning to see the results of his efforts, and although he still didn't know what the final outcome would be, he felt a sense of satisfaction. He had stood up for himself in a way that felt right, and the process was proving that his actions had meaning. The manager's behavior, though brushed off for so long, was finally coming under scrutiny. That afternoon, Marcus sat down at his desk and looked at the letter from the bank again. They had promised to keep him updated as they concluded their investigation, and in the back of his mind, Marcus couldn't help but wonder how long it would be before the manager realized the consequences of his actions. It would be a hard lesson for him, but one that was long overdue. Marcus knew he wasn't done yet. He still had a few steps to go before the manager would truly face the music. But for now, he allowed himself a brief moment of quiet satisfaction. This was just the beginning. Days passed, and Marcus continued to wait for updates from the bank. His mind was constantly occupied with thoughts of the situation, but he did his best to stay focused on other aspects of his life. He couldn't afford to let this one incident take over everything. Still, every time he checked his email or heard the phone ring, his heart skipped a beat, wondering if it was news from the bank. One evening, just as the sun began to set, Marcus received an unexpected call. His phone lit up with the bank's name, and he picked it up quickly, his pulse racing. It was the same representative he had spoken to earlier in the investigation. "Hello, Marcus," the representative said in a calm, professional voice. "I wanted to personally update you on the progress of your complaint. The investigation has reached an important point, and we want to make sure we have all the facts in order." Marcus listened intently, his hands gripping the phone tightly. The representative went on to explain that the bank had now gathered all the information they needed to make a decision. They had interviewed not only other employees who had witnessed the manager's behavior, but also looked into any past records that might shed light on his actions. What surprised Marcus most was that the manager's unprofessional behavior had been an open secret among some staff members who had been hesitant to come forward. "We've discovered that the manager has received multiple informal complaints over the years," the representative continued. "However, until now, there hadn't been enough evidence to take formal action. We appreciate your courage in coming forward and helping us see the full picture." Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him. He wasn't alone in his experience. Other people had felt the same way, and now, it seemed like the truth was coming to light. The idea that his complaint might be the catalyst for change made him feel like his actions were more than just about him. It felt like he was standing up for everyone who had been treated unfairly. The representative told him that the bank would be taking appropriate action to address the manager's behavior. They wouldn't disclose the exact details for privacy reasons, but they assured Marcus that it would be a serious matter. As the call ended, Marcus leaned back in his chair, a sense of accomplishment settling over him. The wheels of change were turning. It wasn't just about the bank manager facing consequences. It was about sending a message that unacceptable behavior wouldn't be tolerated. And this wasn't just his victory. It was a victory for everyone who had ever been belittled or mistreated. Despite the good news, Marcus knew the process wasn't over. The manager had yet to learn of the consequences, and Marcus couldn't help but wonder how he would react. The thought of the man being confronted with the reality of his actions brought a small smile to Marcus's face. It wouldn't be easy for him, and Marcus couldn't help but feel a sense of justice settling in his chest. That night, Marcus reflected on everything that had led up to this point. The humiliation, the research, the evidence, everything had led to this moment. He had stood up, not only for himself, but for others who might not have had the strength or opportunity to do the same. He knew the battle wasn't over, but this was the turning point. The manager would no longer be able to get away with treating people this way. Marcus could finally breathe a little easier, knowing that his decision to take action had made a real impact. The following week, Marcus received an email from the bank with the subject line, "Resolution of your complaint." His heart skipped a beat as he clicked on the message, eager to find out what action had been taken. The email was professional and direct, and it confirmed what he had hoped for. The bank had completed its investigation and had taken decisive action regarding the manager's behavior. They informed Marcus that the manager had been formally reprimanded for his actions and that the bank was putting him through additional training on customer service, ethics, and non-discrimination. In addition to the training, the bank had placed him on probation, and any further incidents of inappropriate behavior would result in termination. Reading this, Marcus felt a mixture of satisfaction and relief. The manager's behavior had finally been acknowledged and addressed. It wasn't just a slap on the wrist. There were real consequences, and Marcus had been the one to push for that change. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. He knew that the reprimand and training wouldn't immediately change the manager's views, but at least the bank was taking steps to ensure it didn't happen again. As he sat back in his chair, Marcus thought about the journey that had led him to this moment. He hadn't set out to ruin anyone's life, but he had known from the beginning that standing up for himself was important. He didn't want anyone else to go through what he had experienced. The more he thought about it, the more proud he felt of the decision to take action. But the most satisfying part was knowing that the manager would have to face the consequences of his own actions. The man had spent years belittling others, thinking he was above reproach. Now he had to deal with the fallout, and Marcus felt that justice had been served. A few days later, Marcus received another call from the bank. This time, it was the same representative who had kept him updated during the investigation. The representative explained that the manager had been informed of the actions the bank was taking and that a meeting had been scheduled for him to discuss the issue further. "Mr. Williams," the representative said, "we wanted to make sure that you were kept in the loop about the resolution. The manager has been made aware of the severity of the situation, and we believe that he understands the gravity of his actions." Marcus listened carefully, the satisfaction building inside him. It wasn't just the bank's actions that made him feel good. It was knowing that the manager had been forced to confront his behavior, even if it meant taking a hard look at himself. Later that day, Marcus saw a news article online that caught his attention. It wasn't about the bank directly, but it mentioned a series of training sessions that were being introduced at several branches as part of a company-wide initiative to improve customer service and prevent discrimination. Marcus couldn't help but smile. He didn't know if his complaint had directly led to this, but he liked to think it played a small part in making things better. He had done more than just file a complaint. He had sparked change. It wasn't just about the bank or the manager anymore. It was about ensuring that others wouldn't face the same treatment. The feeling of knowing he had made a difference, even if it was in a small way, gave Marcus a sense of fulfillment. As Marcus sat back and reflected on the situation, he knew that he had done the right thing. The manager had been held accountable, the bank had taken steps to improve its training, and Marcus had learned a valuable lesson in standing up for what's right. The experience had been painful, but it had also been empowering. And with that, Marcus was ready to move on, knowing that he had left a mark on the situation that would last far longer than any fleeting anger or humiliation. The news of the bank manager's punishment spread quickly among the staff. Marcus couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction as he thought about how the manager was now facing the consequences of his behavior. The training sessions, probation, and reprimands were a clear sign that the bank was taking the issue seriously, but Marcus knew that the manager's reputation had been forever damaged. The arrogance he had shown just a few weeks ago had now come back to haunt him. A few days after receiving the update from the bank, Marcus received a phone call from a colleague he hadn't spoken to in a while, Tanya, who worked at the same bank branch. She had heard about the outcome of the complaint and wanted to reach out to thank him for his courage. It turned out that Tanya had been one of the employees who had witnessed the manager's behavior on several occasions, but had never felt comfortable speaking up. She admitted that she had always been afraid of retaliation and had felt powerless to do anything about it. "I can't believe you actually did it," Tanya said on the phone, her voice filled with admiration. "You've changed things for so many of us, Marcus. I've seen the way he treated people, but I never knew how to bring it up. You've made it possible for all of us to feel like we have a voice." Her words struck Marcus deeply. He had acted out of a sense of personal justice, but now he was realizing just how much his decision had affected others. Tanya wasn't the only one. Several employees had quietly expressed their support for what he had done, saying that they wished they could have spoken up but had been too afraid. It wasn't just about the bank manager anymore. It was about creating a culture where people could feel safe and respected, no matter who they were. As Marcus listened to Tanya, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. What had begun as a single personal encounter had turned into something bigger. He had stood up for himself, but in doing so, he had given others the courage to speak out as well. The realization that his actions had inspired others filled him with a sense of pride. "Thank you, Tanya," Marcus replied. "I didn't do it for recognition, but knowing that it made a difference, well, that means everything." They talked for a while longer, sharing stories about how the atmosphere at the bank had shifted since the manager's actions were addressed. Tanya mentioned that several employees were now more willing to report any unprofessional behavior, and there was a renewed sense of respect in the workplace. Marcus couldn't help but feel that this was exactly what he had hoped for. It wasn't just about the bank manager. It was about changing the entire culture, making sure that no one would ever feel like they had to endure mistreatment in silence. That evening, Marcus thought back to that day when he had first walked into the bank, unsure of what would happen. He remembered the sting of the manager's words, how they had felt like a personal attack. But now, as he reflected on everything that had unfolded, he realized that those words had sparked something powerful. They had pushed him to take action, and in doing so, he had changed not just his own experience, but the experience of others as well. The sense of pride that filled Marcus wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. It was about standing up for what was right and knowing that his actions had made a positive impact. He wasn't a hero or a savior. He was just a man who had chosen to act when faced with injustice, and in doing so, he had helped others find their voice. Marcus smiled to himself, feeling at peace. The battle had been hard, but it had been worth it. He knew that the change he had sparked was something that would endure. The bank, the manager, and the employees had all been changed by his decision to stand up. And in that moment, Marcus felt like he had done the right thing, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever faced unfair treatment. A few weeks had passed since the outcome of the complaint, and life seemed to be slowly returning to normal for Marcus. He continued with his daily routine, focusing on his work and his personal life, but there was an underlying sense of satisfaction that stayed with him. He had taken a stand, and now, as he looked back, he felt proud of what he had done. It wasn't about the praise or recognition. It was the knowledge that he had made a difference, even if it was in a small way. One afternoon, Marcus decided to visit the same bank again. The events of the last few weeks had left a lasting impression on him, and he wanted to see for himself how things had changed. He wasn't expecting anything major, just a quiet sense of closure. As he walked into the bank, he noticed a change in the atmosphere. The staff seemed more relaxed, more open. There was a noticeable shift in the way customers were treated. Marcus observed the tellers smiling more genuinely, and the usual stiffness that had once dominated the branch seemed to have eased. It was as if the energy in the room had shifted, and the air was filled with a sense of respect and professionalism. He approached the counter and was greeted by a familiar face, a teller he had interacted with before. Her smile was warm, and there was a certain ease to her demeanor that hadn't been there in the past. Marcus returned her smile and exchanged pleasantries, noticing that her interaction with the customer ahead of him was much more friendly than he remembered. It wasn't just about a transactional exchange. There was a genuine desire to help. After a few minutes, Marcus was helped by another teller, a man he hadn't seen before. He was polite, efficient, and professional, making sure to address Marcus's needs with a level of care that felt refreshing. As Marcus completed his transaction, the teller looked up from the screen, met his eyes, and smiled. "Is there anything else I can assist you with today?" he asked. Marcus paused for a moment, thinking about how different this interaction felt compared to his first visit. He smiled back and shook his head. "No, I'm good. Just wanted to see how things were going around here." The teller seemed to understand. "Things have been a bit better lately," he said with a small laugh. "We've all had some reminders about how to treat our customers with respect. Makes a big difference when we all work together." Marcus nodded, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. It was the change he had hoped for. It wasn't just the manager who had been affected. The entire culture of the bank had started to shift. It was as though the atmosphere had been lightened, and the staff seemed more genuinely engaged with their work and the people they served. As he left the bank, Marcus couldn't help but feel a deep sense of contentment. His actions had sparked a change, not just for him, but for everyone who worked there. The manager, now under scrutiny, had been forced to reflect on his behavior. The rest of the staff, too, seemed to have taken the lesson to heart. It was a reminder that sometimes one person's decision to stand up for themselves could create a ripple effect that changed an entire environment. As Marcus walked down the street, he reflected on the journey. It hadn't been easy, and there had been moments when he doubted himself. But now, looking back, he knew that every step he had taken was worth it. He hadn't done it for personal gain or revenge. He had done it because he believed in fairness, respect, and the importance of standing up when something was wrong. The satisfaction that came from knowing he had made a difference filled him with a quiet pride. The manager's behavior had been addressed. The bank's culture had improved. And most importantly, Marcus had learned that one person could, indeed, make a change. As he continued down the sidewalk, he felt a renewed sense of hope for the future. Sometimes, doing the right thing was hard, but it always made a difference in the end.